Greetings, Culture Warriors. It is I, Jeffrey Yara, the author of Culture is Everything, and your host for this latest dispatch from the front. Back to the business world today. Got a story here for you. Continuing really in a sad series on the decline of Amazon.com. The Amazon worker who was fired after calling for better warehouse safety standards led a protest in front of Jeff Bezos' New York City apartment. Protesters gathered in front of Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos' New York City apartment on Sunday, calling for better safety and fair pay for Amazon warehouse workers. The protest, which was organized by a group called the Congress of Essential Workers, drew a crowd with signs calling for lawmakers to tax Bezos and pointing out the numerous Amazon fulfillment center workers have died from COVID-19, the coronavirus disease, as Bezos' fortune has risen. The protesters issued a list of demands in advance of the protest, calling for better treatment for essential workers, including sick pay and hazard pay, health care for full-time workers, an increase in hourly wages, and better communication and transparency regarding confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the workplace. The group also called on companies to declare a stance of neutrality on unionization and demanded legislators institute a wealth tax on the richest 3% of Americans. The protesters were led by Christian Smalls, a former assistant manager at an Amazon fulfillment center in Staten Island, New York. Smalls was fired after he helped organize a walkout in protest of how the company was cleaning its facility after an employee tested positive for coronavirus. Smalls said at the time that he was fired in retaliation for organizing the protest. Amazon denied this. Amazon fulfillment centers throughout the U.S. were hit by the coronavirus. At least 8 workers died from COVID-19 as of mid-May, and there were confirmed cases of more than 100 Amazon warehouses. Amazon initially introduced a $2 hourly raise for workers at the start of the pandemic and offered unlimited paid time off, but the company has since ended both policies. Amazon has seen a surge in demand since the pandemic first forced most in-person retail to shut down. The company reported $88.9 billion in sales in the second quarter and a record quarterly profit. Bezos' net worth, already the highest in the world, has ballooned to $187 billion during the pandemic. He recently added a record $13 billion to his fortune in a single day. Sunday's protest took place outside of 212 Fifth Avenue, an apartment building overlooking Madison Square Park in Manhattan. Bezos reportedly owns nearly $100 million worth of real estate in the building, including a $16 million unit he is said to have purchased in April. Okay. All right, so a couple of things. Look, I am no fan of Jeff Bezos. I think he is an absolute hypocrite who has gone the wrong way on a lot of things lately. I think he probably had some sort of meltdown in his personal life, which either triggered or was occasioned by his divorce, and has just really gone off the rails in a lot of ways compared to the way it was before. And since Amazon has a strong founders culture that is defined by Jeff Bezos, I think this has been the result of some of the issues Amazon has had. Now, a couple of things deserve to be said. First off is that Amazon largely was indifferent to conditions for its warehouse workers before this pandemic hit. So Amazon seems to operate on a 2-tiered structure. One where the people in operations and in its fulfillment centers, the people who actually make the company run, the people who Jeff Bezos never wanted to have in the first place because he was going to build an online market and not have any brick and mortar at all, and then found that it was impossible to do what he wanted to do at the margin he wanted to do it at, unless he had the brick and mortar under his control. Well, those people are considered to be beneath the other side of it. The real innovators, the software types, the Amazon Cloud Services brainiacs. Those folks are the real Amazon. So Amazon is an e-commerce fulfillment company. The e-commerce side of it is sexy. That's where all the future, bigwigs at Amazon come from. And they're the big deal. And then they have this bad relative, bad sheep of the family that actually pushes out all the boxes. And they are second-class citizens. That, unfortunately, is how Amazon's culture seems to function. So, no fan of that. There have been a legion of stories, uh, just horror stories about how oppressive the environment is within an Amazon warehouse. That has only gotten worse because of the pace that they have to operate with the pandemic. Here's the other side of the coin that people need to be very cognizant of, and that is this, is that the only reason you're able to get what you need to get to survive through much of this pandemic and the lockdowns has been because a company like Amazon exists. Now, it's not the only company that does it, but for millions and millions of people, it's the one that can reliably get you what you need in some amount of time. So Amazon is fulfilling an absolutely essential function in this dysfunctional pandemic economy. That's just a fact. You don't have to like it, but it is true. And you have to be careful in judging Amazon for how it's fulfilling that function, giving its criticality to it. Look, if you are sitting here in wartime and you're trying to build aircraft carriers, and some of those aircraft carriers need to be dry docked sooner than they should for repairs because something got missed, well, you make certain allowances because it's wartime, baby. And sometimes, working at the pace yard, that's what's going to happen. So when these guys come in and protest, number one, the person who organized the walkout there was in management. And I'm sorry, but the standard for management is that you don't go stirring up trouble and running walkouts. And so Amazon, looking at a manager who's doing that, someone in a leadership position who has decided to wage war against the company writing his check, didn't want to write his check anymore. That's their right. Okay? A stance of neutrality on unionization in this environment is pretty much the death knell for a lot of companies. Margins have been just hammered. Now, Amazon, while they're certainly pulling in money because so many more people are ordering on the demand there, you have to remember that they make what their margin is. So your revenues can go sky high, but you're also incurring higher costs. Why are they incurring higher costs? Because what they need to do to clean the facility, what they need to do to socially distance within the facility, costs money. It's extra equipment, it's extra supplies, it's extra labor to do what they're doing. That money comes out of their margin. They're not charging more by and large for what they do. And so it eats into their margins. And so you can look at it and say, wow, they're really pulling down tons of revenue. Yeah, that's great. But bear in mind that that's also coming with some margin compression. So all in all, you like to preserve your margin. You like to maybe work a little less hard. The other thing you have to consider is by operating these facilities more or less full out the way they are, is you're going to have additional maintenance cost. You're going to run into what they have run into, which is safety issues become a problem. But to go and demand the legislators put a wealth tax on the richest 33% of Americans, what the hell does that have to do with Amazon? Just because Bezos is so rich? So we're gonna tax one person, that's gonna change everything? No. I think you have to realize that there is an agenda there, a socialist agenda, which has precious little to do with what's actually going on. So while I certainly don't believe that Bezos has much of a heart for the conditions that his warehouse workers suffer under, I know the people that are looking to sock it to the wealthiest 3% could not care less about those warehouse workers. And I know that if they put in a union, supposedly to serve them, it would be just like every other union. And there would be the fat cats, Smalls, no doubt, intends to be one of them, sitting in suits all day, appearing in court, appearing in front of the cameras, never working, never setting foot in a warehouse again a day in their lives, while hammering big checks from the union. And where do those big checks come from? Well, they come from the union dues confiscated from the paychecks of those warehouse workers. And probably those union dues are going to be a lot more than the $2 an hour raise that they got during the pandemic and then was eventually phased out. Warehouse workers do not make a lot of money. Typical salary I saw for a warehouse worker was about $14 an hour. That is hard to live on. Now, often they have multiple jobs. They kind of have to have multiple jobs when you're making that kind of money. Now, is it true that there's advancement opportunity if you stick it out, et cetera, et cetera? Absolutely. But look, if you're making under $30,000 a year in a lot of the areas that these warehouses are in, man, you have it tough. And that's before you get to the fact that the work itself is very demanding. They cover a lot of ground. The pace is very high. They're measured constantly in how they perform. I do think that the fact that they're not getting sick pay, hazard pay, the fact that they can't easily obtain health care, that is a problem. These people are the guts of the Amazon operation, and they really ought to, at least for the folks that stick it out past, say, peak season, and stick it out 90 days or more, should really have the opportunity to get benefits from Amazon. That's my personal opinion. I think if Amazon truly values its associates, that's what they would do. The fact that you're not paying a wage that's going to make it possible for them to comfortably support their family is one thing, but the fact that they can't really tap into the healthcare system effectively. They can't really save for retirement. They can't pay for education for their children. Those kind of things are really bad, and there's no reason why Amazon shouldn't invest more in the people who make Amazon happen. To my mind, Bezos is just a typical hypocrite on this very topic. Is on the one hand, when it comes time to signal social justice, to wave the Black Lives Matter flag, Bezos is out on the front lines. Well, he's the publisher of the Washington Post in addition to running Amazon. He's got to be a leader in the political sphere. So he'll be out front man in the barricades. But in the meantime, he treats his warehouse workers, many of whom are African American, like the bottom of his shoe. It's absolutely disgusting. So if you want to talk about Black Lives mattering Jeff Bezos, then why don't you help the Black lives within Amazon? Don't they matter? You can do something about that today. You can make it possible that they don't have to pee in a jar and hide it in a warehouse rack so that they don't get fired. How hard is that? That's one case where the richest man in the world, who controls the keys to every one of those warehouses, could just make it happen overnight. But he doesn't. So what does that tell you about what he really believes? Here's another thing that's interesting. Back when Richard Nixon was president, there was a famous anecdote. There was a book that came out that was called The Population Bomb. It was talking about overpopulation, and some idiots still believe this to this day, that we were going to suddenly overpopulate the world, and there wasn't going to be enough food, and famine was going to be a common thing, and big problems because of all this overpopulation. We need to stop having babies now. And Richard Nixon was actually on the side of the author. When he was asked about it in an interview, he famously said, I absolutely believe in the problem of overpopulation, because everywhere I go, I see nothing but throngs of people. Well, Mr. President, whenever the President of the United States goes somewhere, chances are he draws a crowd. So if you're so stupid as to think that because there are throngs of people around your presidential limousine, that means that those throngs of people are just sitting there with a limousine-sized hole within their mass when you're not there, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. It's rather like when Pauline Kael was famous, the film critic, was famously shocked by Nixon's election, or his re-election, in 1968 by saying, I don't know anyone who voted for him. Well, that says more about you than it does about him, and maybe you ought to get out more. These people live in these little bubbles, and they have no idea what's really going on. And I wonder, as you think about Bezos's Tony, New York apartment in Manhattan, wonder how much time he spends there. But when he goes there, he sees outside his door protesters. And then when he goes to Seattle, Amazon's headquarters, what does he see? Rioters in the streets, protesters in the streets. So one can only imagine that Jeff Bezos believes that the entire world is rioting and that they're coming with pitchforks for him. And so he's going to mouth all the right pieties, whether he believes them or not, whether he acts on them or not, in a hope of diverting their attention from him. Simple survival. It's interesting to contemplate anyway. So the net, I think, on this story here is that any culture worth its salt finds ways to treat their employees with dignity and respect. All of their employees, from the person who's running the latest merger and acquisition deal to the greatest product developer in the history of mankind, all the way down to the person who sweeps the floors and mops the bathrooms, mans the front desk, greets people walking in the doors of the building with a cheerful hello, answers the phone. Everybody gets treated with dignity and respect. It's really the least you can expect of the culture of a major company. Not least of which one so successful as Amazon is. Seems like it's just too much to ask of Jeff Bezos, though. And I think that ultimately the seeds of Amazon's destruction have been sown with the indifference that they show towards their warehouse personnel. It's certainly enough to make me root for Walmart, to root for Kroger, to root for the other folks that are coming to eat Amazon's lunch in the online e-commerce space. But we'll see how it plays out. Perhaps those peasants with pitchforks and torches outside Bezos' properties will lead to a change of heart and some actual progress, and maybe Amazon will once again live up to their vaunted culture. Because at the end of the day, virtue signaling is one thing, but culture is everything. Thank you and have a great day.